Picture a Viking warrior, tall, muscular, powerful. Now ask yourself this: when was the last time he felt truly full? The answer, probably never. Because here's what nobody tells you about Viking life. Despite all their skills in farming, fishing, hunting, and preserving food, Vikings lived in a state of constant gnawing hunger. Not starvation, but never quite satisfied either. And the science behind this will blow your mind. Because the math simply didn't add up. Their bodies needed more fuel than the land could give them. Tonight, we're diving into the hunger that shaped the Vikings, the empty bellies that drove them to raid, the caloric deficit that haunted every winter. This is the story nobody talks about. The calorie crisis. Let's start with numbers that'll change how you see Viking life forever. A modern nutritionist at Hurstwick did something brilliant. They analyzed what Vikings actually ate and calculated the calories. Using diet analysis software from Syracuse University, they created hypothetical Viking meals for each season. They assumed Vikings had access to a variety of foods, everything from fish and meat to vegetables and grains. The first analysis used normal portion sizes, the kind we'd eat at a modern meal. The result, 1,200 calories for a winter diet. Let that sink in. 1,200 calories. That's what a sedentary office worker might eat while trying to lose weight. Not what a Viking needed to survive a Scandinavian winter. Here's the problem. Vikings weren't sitting at desks. They were hauling timber, clearing snow, feeding livestock, repairing tools, hunting through frozen forests. So the researchers ran the numbers again. This time, they calculated actual energy expenditure for a typical day of Viking farm work and hand labor. The result? Over 10,000 calories per day. 10,000. To put this in perspective, modern college athletes routinely need this level of energy. A 1983 study found some athletes averaging over 11,000 calories daily. Vikings were doing the same physical work every single day, just to survive. So the researchers went back and adjusted the portions. They had to use enormous quantities of food just to reach 3,000 calories, probably the bare minimum for survival. We're talking hundreds of grams of meat and fish, nearly a pound, hundreds of grams of dairy, hundreds of grams of nuts, vegetables, and grains. Serving sizes several times larger than what we consider normal today. And here's the kicker. Even 3,000 calories wasn't enough, not even close. The gap between what Vikings needed and what they could reasonably eat. 7,000 calories. Every single day they were running a massive energy deficit. The seasonal nightmare. Now let's talk about why this deficit got even worse. Viking life was controlled by one brutal master, the seasons. In summer and fall, Vikings ate well, fresh vegetables from their kitchen gardens, wild berries gathered from the forests, fish pulled from rivers and seas, game hunted in the woods. Archaeological analysis of Viking settlements has revealed seeds from cabbage, onions, garlic, leeks, turnips, peas, and beans. They had apple orchards, cherry trees, hazelnuts growing wild. These were the fat months, the months of plenty. But they never lasted. From the end of harvest in autumn until the first shoots of spring, Vikings relied almost entirely on preserved foods. And here's what preservation meant. Dried fish so hard it was like chewing wood, salted meat that had to be soaked before eating, fermented cabbage, cheese stored in barrels, skyr, that thick yogurt they made from milk, barley porridge, dense dark flatbread, root vegetables stored in underground pits, day after day, week after week, month after month. The variety disappeared, the fresh food vanished, and with it went the calories. Because here's what most people don't understand about preservation: you can't preserve everything. Salt was expensive. Most Vikings couldn't afford it. The process required boiling down seawater, which meant massive amounts of timber for fire and endless hours of labor. So meat had to be consumed shortly after the animal was killed, unless you were wealthy enough to salt it or smoke it. Most families couldn't. That meant winter diets were grains, dairy, and whatever fish they'd managed to dry or ferment. High in protein and fat, yes, but lacking the sheer volume of calories needed to power through a 16-hour workday in sub-zero temperatures. And the work never stopped. There were still animals to feed, fences to repair, firewood to chop, tools to prepare for spring planting, all of it burning calories they didn't have. The preservation gamble. Viking survival hinged on one thing: how well you preserved food during the good months. Every successful hunt was viewed through the lens of long-term storage. Every catch, every harvest. The most common method was drying. Vikings would gut cod, sometimes behead it, and hang it on massive wooden racks. The cold, dry air would turn it into stockfish, hard as a board. When rehydrated months later, it provided protein, but the process destroyed calories. Smoking worked better for retaining nutrients. Herring and salmon could be smoked and packed in barrels. But smoking required constant attention and more of that precious firewood. Fermentation preserved vegetables and dairy. Cabbage became sauerkraut. Milk became skyr. Berries fermented into preserves. These methods worked. They kept food edible through winter, but they couldn't create calories out of nothing. And there were failures, catastrophic ones. When the historical Viking named Floki first settled a colony in Iceland, his people got so excited about the excellent fishing that they neglected to gather enough fodder for their animals. The result? Near starvation that winter. The colony failed. Later settlers learned from these mistakes. They planned better. They preserved smarter. But even with perfect planning, the math never quite worked. Because Viking farms were small, archaeological evidence shows they were just big enough to keep a family or extended family well fed in good years. Good years. Not every year, not bad years. And Scandinavia had brutal geography working against them. In Norway, extreme elevation differences and limited arable land made crop growing nearly impossible in many areas. The growing season was short, sunlight was inconsistent. Frost could kill crops overnight. Vikings adapted by relying more on hunting, fishing, and animal husbandry than farming. But that created its own problem. You can't store a living cow for winter, you need it for milk. Cattle were kept primarily for milk production and working the land. Not as food. Archaeological evidence shows cows were only slaughtered after they stopped giving milk. Same with sheep and their wool. Same with goats. So the meat Vikings actually ate came mostly from wild game: rabbits, wild boar, elk, deer, reindeer, squirrels. And you had to hunt them in winter conditions that made success incredibly difficult. Thick Scandinavian snow. Prey animals with excellent hearing who could detect a crunching footstep from 100 yards away. Success was never guaranteed. Body responds. So how did Vikings survive running a constant caloric deficit? Their bodies adapted, and not in good ways. One theory suggests Vikings used their own bodies as storage. During summer raids, when they were eating plundered food from wealthier regions, they'd gorge, gain massive amounts of weight, store it as body fat, then return home and lose that weight during winter scarcity. It's called feast or famine metabolism. And it works. Sort of. Your body learns to store every spare calorie as fat because it knows lean times are coming. When food runs low, it burns through those reserves. But here's the cost. You're always either stuffing yourself to the point of discomfort or feeling that constant grinding hunger. There's no middle ground, no satisfaction. Arab traveler Ibn Fadlan described Vikings he traded with as having bodies more perfect than I have ever seen. English chroniclers complained that Vikings ate and drank too much, called them gluttonous. They weren't wrong. Vikings probably did eat enormous quantities when food was available. Because they had to. When your body needs 10,000 calories and you're only getting 3,000 most of the year, you learn to eat everything in sight during the good months. It's not indulgence, it's survival strategy. And the rest of the year, you just accept the hunger. You train your mind to ignore the empty feeling in your stomach. You drink ale to dull the edge. You stay busy with work so you're not thinking about food. You tell yourself it's temporary. Spring is coming. Summer will bring abundance. But spring was months away, and even summer wouldn't truly fill you up because you'd be spending those calories on raids, on farming, on the endless work of staying alive. The hunger that built an age. Now here's the question nobody asks. Did this constant hunger drive Viking expansion? Think about it. You're living in Scandinavia. Your land is rocky, your growing season is short, your belly is always half empty. Then you hear about England. France, lands with longer summers, better soil, bigger harvests, fields of grain stretching to the horizon. Studies suggest that Vikings had a diet roughly 30 to 35% protein, 35 to 40% fats, and 30% carbohydrates. That's almost identical to what modern bodybuilders consider optimal for growth and performance. Meanwhile, French and English farmers had diets closer to 19% protein, 28% fat, and 53% carbohydrates. Even when calories were equal, which they often weren't, Vikings had better body composition than their enemies. More muscle, more strength, but they were still hungry. So when raiding season came, it wasn't just about glory or wealth. It was about transferring the hungry mouths out of Scandinavia for a while. Eating food plundered from victims instead of depleting winter stores at home. Bringing back gold and silver to buy what couldn't be grown. One Viking might catch enough fish to feed his family. His neighbor, the mediocre farmer, might face a hungry winter after bad weather. So they made a deal. The farmer goes raiding. While he's gone, the fisherman catches extra and salts it. When the farmer returns with plunder, they trade. Both families eat. The hunger didn't just shape individual bodies, it shaped Viking society, their economy, their expansion across Europe. Every raid was partly fueled by empty stomachs back home. The mathematics of survival. Vikings weren't starving in the traditional sense. Archaeological studies of Viking skeletal remains show little evidence of nutritional deficiencies. They got their vitamins, their minerals, their protein. What they didn't get was enough energy. 7,000 calories short, every single day. That deficit carved itself into every aspect of Viking life. It drove them to perfect preservation techniques that we still use today. Stockfish, fermentation, smoking. It forced them to master seasonal planning with precision that would impress modern survival experts. It turned them into raiders who sailed thousands of miles looking for better farmland and richer harvests. And it taught them something we've forgotten in our world of 24-hour grocery stores and unlimited calories. How to function while hungry. How to work hard on half rations. How to make every scrap of food count. The Vikings didn't conquer Europe because they were well fed. They conquered it despite being constantly, perpetually, slightly starving. Their strength didn't come from abundance. It came from learning to thrive in scarcity. From turning a 3,000-calorie diet into a civilization that changed the world. Next time you see a Viking portrayed as a feasting warrior with endless mead and roasted meat, remember the truth. That feast was rare, maybe a few times a year, special occasions. The rest of the time, barley porridge, dried fish, stored cheese, and that gnawing familiar ache of not quite enough. If this changed how you see Viking resilience, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who thinks survival is just about having enough food. Drop a comment. Could you have lived like a Viking? Constant work, minimal calories, 6 months of winter? I'll see you in the next one.